But number 2 on the constructed response. We'll add you to the line. I don't think that will be time. Waiting for you guys to stop happening. So number 2 on the constructed response, you're asked to give the following quadratic function equation based on the graph. So look at all what the graph is giving you. What can you see very clearly on the graph? The x-intercepts. What form can you see the x-intercepts super clearly? So if I have the x-intercepts, then yes, factored form is probably the best way to go. Unless maybe those x-intercepts are decimals, then maybe not. But these are not decimals. So all of what we've been doing before was we were given the equation and told to identify the zeros. So here's a few examples. Here's another one. All right, what are the zeros for this random example that I made? Okay, so then if I go back to my given graph and it's telling me that the zeros are -4 and 2, then what would my factor form have to be? I put so it should always start with a parentheses and an x if it's factor form. Oh, because it should look like these, like the problems that we were given. It's just now it has to be, they're giving us the zeros, we need to make the equation. So if these are my zeros, then what would my factored form need to be? Like after this part? That would not give me a 0 -4 though. So anyone else can chime in if you also had trouble with this one. What equation would tell me that these are my zeros? No. Okay, everyone. Let's redo. Let's just restart from the beginning. What can you clearly see from the given graph? The x-intercepts. Out of all the different forms of quadratic functions, which form is it really easy to see the x-intercepts from? From factor form. Great. We've seen a bunch of things in factor form this entire unit. Here's some examples. I'll even make another example. Okay, what would be the zeros of this random thing I made? So it's, wait, say it again, -5 and I could -5. So what's the pattern then? How can you identify your zeros from the equation so easily? What do you mean? Be more specific. Okay, so you are solving each for 0. That is true. That is something you'll be asked about on your Illuminate portion of your test. So yeah, you're having to do inverse operations, and that's how you get that it's -5 to make this parentheses 0. And then it's +9 to make this one 0. But now when you're doing the reverse, trying to make the equation from the zeros, then what should I put right here after the parentheses x? What needs to go next? Someone else can answer too. Carly?
The plus B.
Okay,
X minus 2.
okay, now everyone take a look at this equation, just like how you could tell me the zeros from those other examples I did. Would these give me zeros of -4 and +2?
Yeah.
So then this should represent my graph, but the only thing you have to watch out for is sometimes the graph is like more narrow or wide or things like that. So what I would do once I have my equation is I'd go type it in Desmos and see, does it touch at all three parts that are showing? Because then if it does, then I can move on. I already found my equation. If it's about the restroom, I don't think we'll have time for anyone else.
No, we're not doing the same.
Okay, yes, when I sit down, yes, from my. Okay, so that's one way, but that was kind of a struggle even then. So what else do they show you on your graph? Are you answering or? They show me my vertex. So if that form wasn't clicking for you, if they give you your vertex, then what form can you use? The vertex form. That would require you remembering the formula, which I told you you would need to anyway for other parts of your test, so remember this formula. And what part of it would I plug in my vertex into? Okay, so for the H would be the X of my vertex. And then where else do I plug in?
Yes.
Okay, so I know I need to plug in H. Where else do I need to plug in my vertex form? What else needs to be replaced with the number? The K. So you would have to know that HK is where your vertex goes. So if my vertex is -1, -9, and you would only have a value for A if it was flipped and you know it's negative, or if it got skinnier or wider, we don't really know yet. But you definitely need to plug in for H a -1 and for the K a -9 into the equation. When I clean up these symbols, what happens with this double negative? Becomes a positive. And then adding a negative is the same as just subtracting. So we wouldn't really write plus -9. And then I would go and type this into Desmos and make sure it hits at all those 3 points that were clearly shown on the graph. So you can have 3 different answers that are still right. It just depends on your preference and what's given to you in the graph. I don't recommend standard form, that's just my opinion. I think that one's the hardest. But yeah. Questions on this question? All right, Carly, you had a question? Number 10 on the online study guide. Okay, so number 10 on the online study guide. We have this quadratic function and we want the line of symmetry. So line of symmetry, I know in my algebra class, I only mentioned maybe once, and we really didn't have a whole lot of time to practice it. I'll relate it to something that we did practice, so you could still get the answer really easily. But line of symmetry, do you know what it means for something to be symmetrical? That's not what symmetric means. Harley? So if I draw a line of symmetry, I should have a mirror image on each side. So all quadratics either look like this type of view or that type of view. The line of symmetry would go right down the middle, wherever the vertex is. It would cut through the vertex. So there is a formula for line of symmetry. It's this formula, it's x equals -b/2a. if you are taking me up on my suggestion of making flashcards, make this a flashcard. Line of symmetry is this equation. And the A, B, and C come from ax squared plus bx plus c. Yeah. And my equation that's given to me is not necessarily in that order, but I could write it in that order if it makes it easier for you. But no matter what, A is always what's in front of the x squared. So what's in front of the x squared? In the equation that's given to us, what's in front of the x squared? So A is going to be 2. A is always in front of the x squared, even if they write it out of order. A is always in front of the x squared. A is going to be 2 for when we plug it in. What's my b value going to be? Based on this equation, 8, good. It's always in front of the x to the first power. C is 10, but we don't need C for line of symmetry. We're plugging it into this. It should always have x equals. It should. It should be x equals when you type this in. And when you simplify it, it should be down to just one number. So here's me plugging it in. So negative b over 2a, a being 2. This becomes a negative 8 over what's 2 times 2? 4. And what's negative 8 divided by 4? Negative 8. So when you type it in, it has to be x equals negative 2. If you just put negative 2, it's technically wrong. And I'll show you why in a second. So it's kind of like when we estimated the x coordinate of our vertex. So really, for this question, instead of plugging it in this way, you could also type in your equation into Desmos. So it was 10 plus 8x plus 2x squared. Okay. So your line of symmetry, once you have it, so we already calculated it, but you see, like, I typed in my line of symmetry and it goes right down the middle of my quadratic. So you can also check your line of symmetry equation that you made that way. You could also, from the start, graph your parabola. That's what we call the U shape. It's a parabola. You could graph it. Look at what your x is of your vertex. And then if you put it as x equals whatever the x was of your vertex, it should give you a line down there. Okay. So that is x equals negative 2. Don't put any extra spaces or they'll find it wrong. We might have time for one more depending on what it is. Harley? Number 8 on this study guide? Yeah. So number 8. So we have a graph given to us and we need to select all equations that match it. So it's kind of like our constructed response. You have to see what they're giving you. So they're giving us the x-intercepts and the vertex. Whatever you think is easier. Do you think vertex form is easier or do you think writing it in factor form is easier? Gotcha. So if I was writing this in factor form, what would be my equation that gives me these zeros? So I want the equation. Harley?
Line is x minus 1 x minus 7.
So do you see like how that's different from what you told me, Jan? Okay, so it needs to be this. It needs to be like the reverse of when we identify the zeros. Okay, so this maybe resembles one of my answers already. It does, it's right here. And then they have in different forms, like standard form and vertex form. From factor form, I can get my standard form from multiplying this out. So FOIL, box diagram, double distribute, whatever you like better. So what's x times x?
X squared.
X times -7.
Negative 7.
Inner terms, -1 times x is last term, negative. Can you guys just wait till I ask the question? Maybe just take a breath before you answer. -1 times -7 is what? And then when you combine like terms, what do you get? You do not get positive. -7 plus -1. -8x.
You're adding.
And that matches this one of my answers. To get the vertex form, I need to use my vertex. I don't know an easy way to go from either of these to vertex form. So I would have to know vertex form is this. And that if this is my vertex, HK, I need to plug it into those spots. I don't know what A is, but I could always go back and check on Desmos to see if it's not that equation. It should match these other two if it is. But if I'm plugging in 4, then it would be x minus 4 in parentheses squared plus -9 or -9, which matches this one. You can never have more than one vertex form that's right. So if you find out that one vertex form is right, then it can't be the others. It can never be more than one factored form or standard form. So at most, when you see this on your test, it can be 3. It can be 3 or less, but some of them might not. But I think that's all we have time for, unless you want to pull me aside and ask me something before you leave. Don't forget your devices. If you didn't get 80% or higher in here, please do so over the weekend. Email me for another attempt. I'll get married in right now. Resubmit in Schoology. And maybe consider doing the other extra credit.
That's why.